Have you ever looked at the person you love and suddenly wondered if they were your enemy? My name is Mabel, and this is the story of how my husband tried to erase me from my own life. But I got to the finish line first. This isn't just a breakup, it's betrayal, deception, a domestic chess match disguised as a marriage. It started with quiet phone calls in the dark, money disappearing from our accounts, and a name I'd never heard: Ilya Morrow. Dean didn't just want a divorce. He wanted to walk away with everything: the house, the savings, my future. But what he didn't know, I was listening, watching, planning. And by the time he made his move, I had already made mine. So when he thought I'd be left begging, all he got was a lawyer at his doorstep and a cold reminder that he underestimated the wrong woman. If you've ever had to fight for yourself when someone tried to break you, this story is for you. Comment below and subscribe if you've ever had to outthink someone who thought they had you figured out. Because trust me, he got the papers. And nothing else. I woke up to an empty bed. The space beside me was cold, the sheets untouched for hours. I reached over instinctively, half asleep, still clinging to the lie that maybe Dean had just gotten up for a glass of water. But the silence told me otherwise. The apartment was too still, too quiet. I sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, that eerie sense of awareness creeping in. Something was off. Not in the loud, obvious way, but in that subtle, bone-deep way that makes your skin prickle. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, letting my feet touch the floor. The moonlight poured through the bedroom window in thin slashes, casting long shadows that moved with me as I stood. Then I heard it, his voice. Low, measured, calm. I froze in place, my ears straining to catch more. Just a little longer. She doesn't suspect anything yet. Every hair on my body stood on end. Dean's voice wasn't urgent. It wasn't rushed or nervous. It was soothing, the kind of tone you use when you're making sure everything is under control. The kind of tone that's meant to comfort someone. But it wasn't for me. Who the hell was he talking to? I moved quietly across the hardwood, each step deliberate, careful not to let the boards creak. The hallway was dark, but the soft hum of his voice kept guiding me forward. I couldn't make out the exact words, just the rhythm, the occasional murmur, a pause, a breath, the kind people make when they're speaking close to someone they trust. I didn't want to believe what I was thinking. I didn't want to accept that maybe, just maybe, this was more than a conversation. I took one more step. The floor creaked. Silence. Dean's voice stopped instantly. I held my breath, frozen in place, heart pounding so loud I was sure he'd hear it. Then, footsteps. Approaching. I turned, barely making it back to the bedroom in time, slipping under the covers just as the light in the hallway clicked off. I lay there, eyes shut, chest heaving under the weight of silence. A moment later, I felt the mattress dip. His weight returned beside me, like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just been in the other room, whispering secrets I was never meant to hear. I forced my breathing to stay steady. I could feel him watching me for a moment. Then he exhaled, shifting on the bed like everything was normal. I rolled over, my voice groggy, quiet. "Where were you?" "Bathroom," he muttered without missing a beat. A lie. Too fast. Too easy. "And the phone call?" I asked, blinking at him through the darkness. He didn't even flinch. "Client. Had to smooth out a few things." I nodded slowly. "At 1 a.m?" Dean chuckled, that soft, dismissive tone he always used when he wanted me to stop asking questions. "Welcome to high-stakes law, babe." That's when I knew. This wasn't a late-night work call. Dean didn't whisper on work calls. He didn't care if I overheard. Half the time he took them on speaker. Whatever he was doing tonight, it wasn't work. And it sure as hell wasn't innocent. I turned away from him, pulling the blanket tighter around my shoulders. But sleep didn't come. The next morning, he was still asleep when I slipped out of bed. I padded barefoot into the kitchen, the tile cold under my feet, my phone clenched tightly in my hand. I never checked our bank accounts. Dean handled that stuff. He liked it that way, said it made things easier. I used to believe him, but something told me to look. And there it was. $500, $1,200, $2,000, over a dozen withdrawals in just the last few months, small enough not to raise suspicion, frequent enough to form a pattern. None of them matched anything we had talked about. Not bills, not savings, not investments, just money. Gone. I stared at the numbers, bile rising in my throat. Dean wasn't just hiding something, he was moving something. Quietly, repeatedly. Behind me, I heard him coming. I quickly locked my phone and placed it face down on the counter. He stepped into the kitchen, rubbing the sleep from his eyes like nothing was wrong. "Morning," he said, voice low, raspy. "What's for breakfast?" I turned slowly. "I was about to ask you the same thing." He grinned, leaning in to pour himself coffee. "Guess it's your turn then." I watched him carefully. Every movement, every blink. I couldn't unsee the transactions. I couldn't unhear the whisper. "I checked the bank account this morning." He froze, just for half a second, barely long enough to register. But I saw it. His hand tensed around the coffee mug before he forced a casual shrug. "Just some investments," he said. "Investments?" He nodded, taking a long sip. "Business opportunities, short-term gains, nothing to worry about." He didn't even blink. But I knew better now. He thought he was 5 steps ahead. Thought I was still asleep. Thought I hadn't heard the whisper in the dark. He was wrong. I spent the rest of that day trapped in my own home, pretending everything was fine, while my world quietly tilted off its axis. Dean moved through the apartment like nothing had happened, cracking jokes, scrolling his phone, occasionally glancing at me with that same unreadable expression he always wore when he didn't want to give anything away. But I was watching him now. Really watching. Every glance, every breath, every time he set his phone face down on the table like he was hiding the damn nuclear codes. And still, part of me tried to rationalize it. Maybe the transactions were legitimate. Maybe the phone call was work-related. Maybe I was overreacting. But the way he looked at me when I said I had checked the bank account, that fraction of hesitation, the twitch of his jaw, it wasn't nothing. It was confirmation. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed beside him, motionless, while he drifted off effortlessly, like a man without secrets. But I knew now that was a performance too. His breathing even, his body relaxed. Meanwhile, my mind was moving like a machine that couldn't power down. Who was Ilya Morrow? Why was he transferring money? And why the sudden interest in my personal accounts? At breakfast the next morning, I barely touched my coffee, the acid in my stomach making everything taste sour. I thought maybe he'd pretend to work from home again, but instead, he got dressed, suit perfectly pressed, tie knotted with intention, and said he had an early client meeting. He kissed me on the forehead and told me not to wait up for dinner. I smiled and nodded, like a fool. The door closed behind him, and I didn't even wait 5 seconds before grabbing his laptop from the office. It was password protected. Of course it was, but not beyond me. Dean wasn't as clever as he thought. He reused the same combination for everything. His mother's birthday. I typed it in. The screen blinked. I was in. I don't know what I expected. Maybe some email chain, some receipt trail, anything to connect the dots. But it was all clean. Too clean. No banking apps, no work files. Just a few neatly labeled folders. I opened one called Legal Docs, but it was all legitimate case files. Nothing personal. I was just about to give up when I noticed a folder tucked inside another, a digital Matryoshka doll. Temp. Inside it, a single PDF. Property Consolidation Draft 3. My throat went dry as I opened it. There it was, in plain, cold legal text. A draft for transferring jointly held assets, including my condo, into his name. The justification? Legal consolidation in case of emergency or dissolution. The words sat there like poison. Dissolution. Not discussion. Not agreement. Just cold, calculated intent. The rage hit me in waves. I sat back on the chair, staring at the screen, willing myself not to scream. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was proof. Dean was preparing to leave me. Not just walk away, but walk away with everything. He wanted to gut my life and leave me standing in the ashes, wondering where it all went wrong. But he miscalculated one thing. I wasn't the kind of woman who begged. I wasn't the kind of woman who handed over keys to a kingdom she built with her own damn hands. No, I was the woman who called her lawyer, the woman who moved first. And that afternoon, while Dean was probably laughing over a bourbon at some sleek, overpriced bar downtown, I sat across from Patricia Halberd, a woman with a quiet voice and shark eyes, and showed her everything. She flipped through the document, her expression never changing. Then she looked up at me and said, "We move everything. Today." By the time Dean got home, I had already opened a private trust account, shifted my liquid assets, and placed a freeze on our joint credit lines. He walked through the door like nothing had changed, humming some tune under his breath, loosening his tie, asking if I wanted Thai or pizza for dinner. I told him Thai was fine. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. And when he kissed my cheek and disappeared into the shower, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping wine with hands that didn't shake anymore. I didn't need to warn him, didn't need to yell or cry or accuse, because he had already lost. He just didn't know it yet. Not until a few days later, when he tried to move my money and realized it was gone. That was the moment the tide turned. When the hunter realized the prey had teeth. Dean didn't say anything at first. That was the only sign something was wrong. He came home later than usual, his tie already off, jaw clenched like he'd been grinding his teeth the entire drive. I was on the couch pretending to read, glass of wine in hand, feet curled beneath me like it was just another quiet evening. But the moment he walked through the door, I felt the tension pour off him like heat. He didn't greet me, didn't ask what I wanted for dinner, just dropped his keys on the counter a little too hard and went straight to the bedroom without a word. I listened to his footsteps, slow and uneven, and counted every second until I heard the unmistakable sound of drawers opening, then closing harder than necessary. His voice finally came, low and sharp, from down the hall. "Hey babe, did you touch our joint account today?" I set my glass down gently, as if the sound mattered. "No," I called back. "Why?" My voice didn't waver. I had practiced the question like a line in a play. There was silence, then his footsteps again, closer this time. He appeared in the doorway, arms crossed over his chest, mouth a thin line. "Some of the funds are missing," he said. "A lot of them." I raised my eyebrows like it was news to me. "Maybe it's just a glitch?" Dean didn't move. He just stared at me, like he was trying to read something written behind my eyes. I held his gaze and tilted my head. "What's going on, Dean?" He blinked slowly. Too slowly. That's when I realized he was trying to figure out whether I knew, whether I was bluffing. "Nothing," he finally said. "I just need to make a few calls." He disappeared back into the office. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. I already knew what he would find. Patricia and I had worked fast. Every traceable asset I owned was moved or protected, every vulnerable joint thread severed. He would open the account and see a black hole where his safety net used to be. And then, eventually, he would start to panic. He wouldn't show it right away. Dean was too proud for that. But it would surface in small ways. The restless pacing, the silence that dragged just a little too long, the edge in his voice when he asked what I was doing tomorrow, as if he was trying to plan around me. He was calculating again. But now, so was I. The next morning, I woke up early and made coffee like I always did. He sat across from me, pretending to read the news on his phone, but I could feel his eyes on me over the screen. "I think we should go over our finances," he said casually, not looking up. I took a sip of my coffee, hiding my smile behind the rim of the mug. "What for?" He shrugged, finally meeting my gaze. "Just in case something happens. You know, emergencies." My heart didn't even skip. I was past that now. Past the fear, past the confusion. This was the part where he tried to recover, to salvage what was left of his plan. If he couldn't steal it outright, he'd charm it out of me, or guilt me, or gaslight me into handing it over. "I guess we could make a list," I said, like I was entertaining the idea. "Of accounts, passwords, assets, that kind of thing?" Dean smiled, but there was something brittle behind it now. "Exactly," he said. "Smart to keep things organized." I nodded, setting my cup down. "Yeah, I'll think about it." Then I stood, kissed the top of his head, and walked away. I didn't need to give him an answer. The silence was answer enough. That evening I got the message. Patricia had finalized everything. The trust was locked. The assets were shielded. Legally, Dean no longer had access to a single cent that wasn't his. I stood by the window with the city lights flickering below me and watched his reflection in the glass as he moved behind me, still pretending everything was fine. But I could see the cracks now, the stiffness in his shoulders, the way he watched me like I was a ticking clock he couldn't read. I knew he was about to make his move, and I was ready. I turned to him, voice soft, casual. "Hey, Dean?" He looked up. "Yeah? If you ever wanted out, why didn't you just say so?" There was a flicker, panic, quickly buried. "What are you talking about?" he asked, too fast. I smiled at him. "Nothing," I said, and walked out of the room. But in my chest, I could feel it shifting, the power, the balance. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting. I was in control. The papers came 3 days later. A thick envelope, dropped off by a man in a blazer who didn't make eye contact and didn't wait for a signature. Just rang the bell, handed it over, and walked away like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was a bomb wrapped in manila paper. I already knew what it was the second I saw Dean's name printed on the top left corner. I didn't open it right away. I just stood there, barefoot on the cold tile of our entryway, holding it in both hands like it might catch fire. My pulse thudded in my ears, not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. He had finally done it. I went to the kitchen, set the envelope down on the table, and stared at it. 10 minutes passed, maybe 20. Then I opened it with a single slow tear along the flap. Inside, petition for dissolution of marriage. Filed, signed, dated, neat as a bullet. I read every word. Not because I needed to. Patricia would dissect it later. But because I wanted to feel it. I wanted to let the betrayal settle in my bones. The request was clinical, detached. Division of assets, spousal support, property reassignment. It read like a grocery list for someone trying to buy a new life with mine. He wanted half the condo, half the shared accounts, my car, and spousal support, because apparently Me covering his gaps for the last 2 years meant I owed him. I laughed. Actually laughed, bitter and hollow, right there at the table, because of course he had the audacity. Dean didn't just want to leave. He wanted to win. Wanted to gut the house, take the shell, and leave me standing in it. But he was too late. I had already emptied the house of its value. Financially, legally, emotionally, I had prepped for this like war. He came home that evening like nothing had happened. That was the part that broke something in me. He walked in with takeout in one hand and that smug little grin like we were still playing house. "Ty," he announced, dropping the bag on the counter. "Your favorite." I stood there, watching him like I was seeing a ghost wear my husband's face. "You filed," I said quietly. His smile didn't even falter. He turned to grab plates. "Yeah," he said like it was a normal sentence. "We've been heading there for a while. You know that." He said it like it was a breakup text. Casual, painless, expected. "You could have told me," I said, "instead of trying to trick me into signing my life away last week." That stopped him. Only for a second, but I saw it. The flicker in his eyes. He had thought I'd let that go. "It was a precaution," he said calmly. "I didn't want it to get messy." I smiled, slow and cold. Too late. Dean set the plates down, leaned against the counter, and folded his arms like he was about to give a TED talk on how divorces should be civilized. "I think we can do this without lawyers getting ugly," he said. "Split things evenly. No drama." I tilted my head, amused. "You mean now that there's nothing left to take?" His jaw clenched. "What are you talking about?" I took a step closer, meeting his eyes without blinking. "I moved my assets last week, everything, into a private trust. You don't have access to any of it anymore." The silence was instant, heavy. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, arms still crossed, but his entire posture had changed. Stiffer, tighter. "You can't do that," he said eventually, but his voice lacked the confidence he'd always worn like a second skin. "Legally, that's legal," I cut in, "because I did it before you filed, and Patricia will be happy to explain the rest." He didn't eat that night, just sat at the table, phone in hand, texting someone like it was a lifeline. I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. I knew the name already. Ilya Morrow. I'd seen it flash across his screen days ago. I hadn't said anything then, but the name had buried itself in my memory like a thorn. Now I watched the way his fingers moved, fast and agitated, and I wondered what Ilya thought about this little turn of events, about Dean's plan unraveling before either of them could cash in. He finally looked up at me, his face hard and unreadable. "You think this is over?" he asked quietly. "It's not." I didn't flinch. "No," I said. "It's just your turn to lose." He stood, grabbed his phone, and walked out of the apartment without another word. I didn't stop him. I just poured myself another glass of wine, sat down, and waited for the next move. Because Dean was right about one thing. It wasn't over. Not yet. The silence after Dean walked out didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the sharp edge of a knife being dragged slowly across the surface of something fragile. I sat there in my kitchen, wine glass in hand, staring at the door long after it had slammed shut. My mind wasn't racing anymore. It was focused, cold, still. Dean wasn't the type to storm off and lick his wounds in private. He was the type to regroup, to re-strategize, to come back harder. He wouldn't accept the loss. Not like this. He would find a new angle, another way to take what he thought he was entitled to. And I knew, deep in my bones, he wasn't going to do it alone. Ilya would be the next player on the board. Whoever she was, business partner, mistress, co-conspirator, I didn't care. She was part of it now. The moment I saw her name on his screen, followed by, "Just make sure she stays in the dark," she became part of the war. I didn't hear from Dean the next day. No texts, no calls, not even a passive-aggressive email disguised as logistics. He was quiet, which was worse than a tantrum. It meant he was planning. That morning, I had an appointment with Patricia. We met at her office, the glass walls overlooking the river, her desk already covered in files. She didn't waste time. "He's going to escalate," she said, flipping open a folder. "He'll push for asset discovery, maybe even accuse you of hiding funds illegally. It's textbook for men like him." I nodded. "Let him try. Everything's documented. Every transfer, every timestamp." Patricia smirked. "And now that it's locked in a trust, he'd need a miracle to touch it." Still, I wasn't stupid. Legal protection was one thing. Reputation was another. I worked in finance. Credibility was everything. If he couldn't get to my money, he'd go after my name, my career, my ability to stand in a room and be taken seriously. It started at work 2 days later. At first, just stares, lingering, uncertain. Then the whispers. My assistant, Rachel, stepped into my office mid-morning, looking uncomfortable. "There's something going around," she said, voice hesitant. "People are saying, well, that you've been moving money, that there are irregularities." I stared at her. "Irregularities?" She bit her lip. "I didn't want to bring it up, but Dean's been talking to people, lawyers, some of your contacts. It's getting around." I sat back, exhaling slowly. I should have seen this coming. If Dean couldn't beat me legally, he'd try to poison the air around me, create just enough doubt to make people second guess. "Thank you for telling me," I said. She nodded quickly, then left, closing the door behind her. I stared at the floor, fists clenched in my lap. He was going to burn everything on his way down. And he thought I wouldn't fight back. By the time I got to Patricia's office that afternoon, I was done being polite. I slammed a stack of printed screenshots onto her desk, emails, texts, hearsay dressed up as truth. "He's telling people I laundered our money," I said. Patricia barely blinked. "Let him," she said calmly. "He's overplaying his hand, and we have options." She flipped open her laptop. "We send a cease and desist. If he ignores it, we move for defamation." But even as she spoke, I felt the burn in my chest. It wasn't just about legality anymore. It was personal. He wanted to ruin me, and I wasn't going to sit back and let him. "He's trying to drag me through the mud so I'll settle," I said. Patricia nodded. "Because you didn't crumble like he thought you would. Because you beat him to the punch." Then a new voice joined us. Beatrice, our forensic analyst. She stepped into the room holding a thin file and a knowing look. "You're not going to like this," she said, "but you are going to want to see it." Inside the file were more documents, financial summaries, forged transfers, false records. "They're trying to set you up for fraud," Beatrix said. "Filed through a third party. But look at the timestamps." I did. And that's when it hit me. The dates didn't match the existence of the accounts. Some of the transfers happened before the accounts were even created. It was a mistake, a stupid, arrogant mistake. But it was enough to prove the entire thing was manufactured. Dean had crossed a line now. He wasn't just trying to win. He was trying to destroy. And he was willing to lie to do it. Patricia looked up at me, face unreadable. "We go on the offensive," she said. "Expose the forgery, sue them both for falsifying legal evidence, and go for full damages." I nodded slowly, eyes locked on the fake documents in my hands. "Let's bury them." Dean wanted a war. I was going to give him one. The air outside Patricia's office felt heavier than usual. Even the late afternoon sun looked diluted. like it was passing through smoke. I stepped onto the sidewalk, the forged document still in my bag, my heels clicking against the concrete with more force than necessary. Dean had made his move. Now it was my turn. There was no more benefit of the doubt, no more clinging to the idea that maybe this was just a messy breakup between two people who'd grown apart. No, this was war. And my soon-to-be ex-husband was willing to burn down everything to get what he wanted. My name, my money, my peace. But he'd underestimated the most dangerous thing in any battle. A woman who's already lost what mattered and has nothing left to protect but herself. The first thing I did was call the analyst. Then I called the private investigator. By the end of the day, I had everything I needed: proof, strategy, motive. I wasn't playing defense anymore. The next morning, I walked into Patricia's office and dropped a new folder on her desk. Emails, transcripts, time-stamped screenshots. "He's been spreading this to colleagues, clients, people at my firm," I said. "I want it all documented." Patricia scanned the contents, her expression tightening with each page. "He's more desperate than I thought," she muttered. "He knows he's lost the financial battle, so now he's trying to destroy your credibility, discredit you, isolate you, and push you into settling just to make it stop." I nodded. "Which is why I'm not going to settle. I'm going to end this." She looked up at me for a long moment. Then, without a word, she picked up the phone and called her paralegal. "File the defamation suit. Today." We sat in silence for a moment as she hung up. Then she leaned back in her chair and smiled, not the polite, professional kind. The kind a wolf shows just before it bites. The court date came faster than expected. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting across from Dean in a beige, overly air-conditioned courtroom that smelled like paper and stale nerves. He looked polished, his tie too tight, and his expression too calm. But I knew the signs: his foot tapping under the table, his lawyer whispering too often, the way he avoided my gaze. He wasn't calm. He was waiting for a miracle. And when Patricia stood, calm and lethal, and began presenting the forensic evidence, the lies unraveled like thread pulled too tight. The timestamps, the fabricated transfers, the non-existent accounts, it all came out in perfect, devastating order. Then the forensic analyst took the stand. Her voice was clinical, unemotional. The facts did all the damage. Finally, Patricia handed the judge our motion: proof of falsified legal evidence paired with a defamation suit against Dean and Ilya. Dean's lawyer scrambled. There were whispered huddles, exchanged glances, panicked page flipping. But it was too late. The judge ruled fast. Motion dismissed. Dean's claims thrown out. Full legal fees assigned to him. And the defamation case? Moving forward. Dean didn't look at me as he left. Ilya wasn't there. Cowardice has a habit of showing up alone. I stayed in my seat for a long time after the courtroom emptied. Let the silence settle. It wasn't victory I felt. Not yet. It was something quieter. I didn't have to wait long. It was the next morning when Patricia called, her voice clipped and businesslike, but I could hear the tension wrapped tight beneath every word. "Dean and Ilya just filed a formal complaint," she said without preamble. I didn't say anything, just waited, phone pressed against my ear like it could steady me. "They're accusing you of financial fraud, falsifying records. According to them, you manipulated joint funds to hide assets during the marriage." My throat went dry. It wasn't shock, it was the weight of confirmation. This was Dean's last card, the one he'd been saving in case everything else failed. The Hail Mary meant to ruin me. Patricia paused, then added, "They submitted documents. Doctored ones, but convincing. If the court takes this seriously, it opens a criminal investigation." I didn't answer right away. I sat down at the edge of my bed, eyes locked on the sunlight streaming through the blinds, casting thin lines across the floor. I felt nothing. No panic. No fear. Just an eerie stillness. Like my body already knew this was coming. I cleared my throat. Can we prove they're fake? There was a rustle of papers on the other end of the line. Then Patricia's voice, more controlled now. Beatrix already flagged a mistake. Several, actually. The accounts the transfers supposedly came from didn't exist at the time those transactions were dated. There are inconsistencies in the formatting, timestamps, amateur errors. Whoever did this didn't expect scrutiny. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. So we move? I asked. Patricia didn't hesitate. We move. I hung up and stared at the wall for a long time, trying to wrap my head around the depth of it. Not just the desperation, but the darkness. Dean wasn't trying to win anymore. He was trying to destroy. The man I married had vanished, if he'd ever existed at all. What stood in his place now was someone colder, meaner, more dangerous. And still, he thought I would break. That this would scare me into giving up. But he didn't understand who I'd become. That afternoon, I walked into Patricia's office with a different kind of silence around me. Not the silence of dread, the silence of precision. Focus. War. She slid a thick file across the table. We're countersuing for defamation and falsifying legal evidence. We'll submit our own forensic analysis and demand full damages. He wants to drag this out. Fine. But he's not walking away from this untouched. I opened the folder and skimmed through it. It was all there. The proof, the motive, the lies. The pieces fit together like a perfect ruin. I looked up at her. I want everything. His reputation, his credibility, Ilya's too. I want them discredited by the time this is over. Patricia leaned back in her chair, that calm predator's smile flickering across her face. Then we'll make that happen. It didn't feel like vengeance. It felt like reclamation. Taking back what was mine, not just the money or the name, but the version of myself he thought he could erase. Court was scheduled 2 weeks later. The final round. Dean arrived with a new lawyer, stiffer than the last, suit expensive and eyes calculating. He looked straight at me as he sat down, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of looking back. I focused on Patricia, who rose from her chair like she wasn't just going to speak, she was going to gut someone. And she did. She walked the court through every falsified document, every fake transaction, every sloppy mistake. Then she called the forensic analyst to the stand. Beatrix didn't embellish. She didn't need to. The facts were knives, sharp and undeniable. When the judge reviewed the evidence, they didn't ask a single question. Just nodded, closed the file and said, "This complaint is dismissed. Mr. Keller will be responsible for all legal fees moving forward." Patricia wasn't done. She stood again, motioning to the next folder. "And now, Your Honor, we would like to move forward with our defamation and evidence falsification suit." Dean's lawyer stood abruptly, whispering frantically. Then finally, he cleared his throat. "Your Honor, my client would like to withdraw all claims." And that was it. The end, or so I thought. Dean didn't reach out. He didn't call, didn't show up, didn't try to beg or explain. Maybe he finally realized there was nothing left for him to twist. Or maybe Ilya had cut her losses the moment his plan backfired. Either way, his silence was the cleanest gift he ever gave me. I spent that night at my mother's house. Margot had been waiting with champagne and too much food, pretending she wasn't crying when I walked through the door. She held me tighter than she had in years, whispering, "It's over, baby. You're safe now." I let myself believe her. Even Beatrix was there, raising her glass with that devilish grin and offering a toast. "To freedom," she said, "and to never letting a man think he can outsmart you twice." I laughed then, Really laughed, for the first time in what felt like forever. There was no tension behind it, no pain buried inside, just the sound of something old being released. We ate and talked and let the noise of celebration drown out everything that had come before it. But later, when the laughter died down and the plates were cleared, I found myself standing alone on the balcony with the city glowing beneath me. The skyline looked different somehow, sharper, quieter, more honest. I thought about the girl I was when I married Dean. Naive, maybe. Hopeful, definitely. Someone who believed in forever and compromise and trusting your partner to hold your heart with care. I didn't regret being her. She wasn't weak. She was just untested. But the woman standing there now? She was something else entirely. She was forged. And she didn't need anyone to carry her anymore. My phone buzzed against the railing, a number I didn't recognize lighting up the screen. I didn't hesitate. I hit block and turned the ringer off without a second thought. I wasn't available for ghosts. Later that night, I sat down at my desk with a fresh document open on my laptop. A blank page, white and endless and waiting. The kind of silence that felt full of possibility, not fear. I didn't know what I was going to write yet. A new story, maybe. A different beginning. Something that wasn't wrapped in loss. But I knew this. I wasn't writing about Dean anymore. His chapter was closed. His name was irrelevant. What mattered now was the voice that came after. The one that belonged to me. I shut the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and whispered into the dark. This is mine now. And for the first time since this whole thing started, I didn't feel like I needed to fight. Because there was no enemy left to chase. Just a future I finally owned. The peace didn't last long. That's the thing no one tells you about surviving. Just because you've won the war doesn't mean you're done checking over your shoulder. For a while, I let myself believe the silence was real. I settled back into my routines, started running again in the mornings, finally unpacked the last box from the move I'd been pretending wasn't temporary. I even caught myself humming once, barefoot in the kitchen with coffee in hand, and it felt like something close to healing. But survival has a memory. It lingers in your bones. And on a Thursday morning, just as the sky began to lighten and the city started humming awake, I walked into the office and felt it. The shift. The energy was off. The eyes were back. I passed 2 co-workers whispering near the elevators. They smiled at me a second too late, like their faces forgot the choreography. I knew that look. I knew that pause. I knew when someone had read something they weren't supposed to. Rachel, my assistant, waited until lunch to bring it up. She stepped into my office like she was holding something broken behind her back, and the second I looked up, I knew. "He's trying again," she said quietly. "There's a blog post. Not big, but someone's sharing rumors about financial misconduct, again." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling like it might offer divine patience. "And people believe it?" Rachel hesitated, then nodded. "Some do. Or at least they don't know what to think anymore." I let the silence sit between us, thick and familiar. Dean had lost everything, and he was still trying to take more. Not in court this time, but out here, in public, in whispers, in carefully planted doubt. I didn't ask Rachel to send me the link. I didn't need to read it. I already knew the rhythm of Dean's tactics. Make the lie just believable enough to breed hesitation, just scandalous enough to go viral in the right circles. That afternoon, I walked into Patricia's office without calling ahead. She barely looked up from her desk. "I saw it," she said. "He's getting sloppy." I sat down across from her and crossed my arms. "He's getting desperate." She nodded once. "We already filed a cease and desist with the site. If they don't take it down, we sue." But I shook my head. I'm tired of chasing him from behind. I want to hit first. Patricia looked up sharply. You mean go public? I met her eyes. I mean let people know exactly who he is. We spent the next week putting it together. The timeline, the emails, the court documents, public record, all of it. Beatrice helped compile the financial reports, each page stamped with dates and details that dismantled the lies piece by piece. Then I wrote. Not a blog, not a rant, a statement. My story, plain and clear, not emotional, not vengeful, just the truth, laid bare like a weapon on the table. When it went live, it didn't explode. It spread. Quietly. Quickly. People started sharing it, commenting, responding. And for the first time, the whispers shifted. The narrative changed. Dean didn't say a word. Not publicly. Not privately. Because now, his tactics were out in the open. His playbook exposed. And a man like Dean only knows how to win in the dark. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need him to fall apart. I just needed him seen. And now that he was, there was nothing left for him to hide behind. Nothing left for me to fear. I thought that would be the end of it. I told myself I should be relieved. This is what I wanted, wasn't it? For it to be over. For him to retreat with nothing left to leverage. But closure never feels the way you think it will. Sometimes it's not a finish line. It's just the absence of noise. And when you've spent months, or years, bracing for impact, silence feels unnatural. I caught myself listening for the door, expecting the late-night key turn that used to signal Dean walking in from God knows where. I found his shirt still tucked into the back of my closet, the expensive ones he used to wear to meetings that weren't meetings. For a moment, I thought about tossing them. Then I didn't. I let them hang there like trophies. Proof of the man I outlasted. There's a strange kind of power in not needing to burn the evidence anymore. When you've already won, the truth can just sit there and rot. A week after the post went viral, I stood in line at a grocery store, tired from a long day, scanning the same headlines on repeat. A woman behind me leaned in and said quietly, "You're Mabel, right?" I turned, unsure for a moment if it was a mistake, but her face was too familiar with sympathy. "I read your story," she said. "That was brave." I thanked her, but all I could think was, this isn't brave. It was necessary. It was survival. But I smiled anyway, because I understood what she meant. I had become a symbol without asking for it. A cautionary tale wrapped in a victory lap. That night, I walked home instead of taking a cab. The city felt different under my shoes. It wasn't just that I felt safe. It was that I knew I'd earned it. Every scar. Every sleepless night. Every moment I chose to hold my ground when it would have been easier to let him win. The silence wasn't haunting anymore. It was mine. The next day, Patricia called just to say congratulations. The case was closed, the damage contained, and the settlement airtight. It's rare, she said, for someone to walk away from something like this with everything still intact. I knew she meant the finances, the legal wins, but I thought about something else. The version of myself I'd rebuilt in the process. I didn't walk away, I told her. I fought my way out. She laughed, sharp and satisfied. Well, you've got your life back now. What do you want to do with it? The question sat with me long after the call ended, because I didn't know. For so long, everything had been about not losing. Now, for the first time, I had space to think about what I actually wanted. No one trying to control it. No one keeping tabs. Just me, and a future I wasn't afraid of anymore. I started with the smallest thing. I bought a new key. One that opened only my door, to only my home. I changed the locks, not because I thought Dean would come back, but because I never wanted to think about him walking through that threshold again. I painted the walls in my bedroom a different color, warmer, sharper. I changed the sheets, burned the candle he used to like, and filled the closet with only my things. The space began to feel like mine in a way it never had before. Not borrowed, not shared, claimed. I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't even need the story to end dramatically. The victory was quieter than I expected, but it was full, whole, real. And for the first time, I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I was looking ahead. Healing doesn't announce itself. It doesn't knock or ask permission or show up with fanfare. It arrives slowly, like light creeping through curtains you forgot to close. I noticed it one morning when I woke up without the weight in my chest. That ache that had lived there like a tenant, steady and constant. Gone. I stretched, rolled over, and didn't reach for the other side of the bed. That constant state of readiness, of hypervigilance, was no longer my normal. I had a new normal now. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't involve surviving him. There was a slowness to everything after that. The kind that's almost boring, but in the best way. I started cooking again. Real meals, not frozen leftovers microwaved in silence. I rearranged the furniture in the living room, just because I could. Just because I wanted to see what the space looked like when it was shaped by my decisions, my comfort. I started saying yes to things. Drinks after work, a gallery opening downtown. For months, I had been writing defense statements in my head, justifying, explaining, anticipating the next strike. Now I was just writing, without fear, without audience. Just me and the blank page and the soft click of my laptop keys. There's something holy about quiet progress, about realizing you're okay before you even notice the pain is gone. Still, some ghosts have long arms. I was walking home one night, late, but not dangerously late, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Just a laugh. One that used to echo through my apartment like background noise. I froze for a split second, heart stuttering, before I turned. It wasn't him. Of course it wasn't. Just a stranger with a similar cadence. But it reminded me of something I hadn't thought about in a while. Triggers aren't signs of weakness. They're just echoes. You can't always control when the memory shows up. What matters is how you respond to it. So I kept walking, slower at first, but steady. I didn't look back again. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of wine, turned on the record player, and sat on the floor like I used to before life got complicated. I let the music wash over me. I let the quiet hum of safety settle back into my skin. It didn't ruin me, hearing that voice. It didn't send me spiraling. That was the difference. That's how I knew I'd really made it through. Margot asked me once if I would ever date again. She asked it over brunch like it was casual, but I knew she was testing the waters. I didn't answer her right away. Not because I didn't know, but because I wasn't sure the answer would make sense to anyone but me. Love had once felt like an anchor. Now, I wasn't looking to be anchored. I wanted to float for a while, to move through my days without the pressure of being someone else's support system, or strategy, or target. Maybe, I said eventually, but not now. Not until I'm sure I'd be choosing it because I want to, and not because I need to fill some space someone else left behind. Margot nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Maybe every woman who's been broken open by betrayal understands the difference between loneliness and solitude. The first aches, the second heals. I didn't want a grand finale. There would be no revenge speech, no final confrontation. I didn't even want an apology. What would it change? Dean's silence, for all the damage he tried to cause, had become the cleanest ending I could have asked for. There was no new smear, no sudden reappearance, just the absence of him. And that was enough. Some victories are loud. Mine was quiet, No one clapped. No one filmed it for a viral moment. But I knew. I knew because I could stand in my own home, take a deep breath, and feel safe in my own body. I could look at my bank account and see everything he tried to steal, still sitting there, untouched. I could go to sleep without double-checking the locks, and wake up knowing the only person who controlled my life was me. That was the win. That was the closure. That was the ending. Not because someone handed it to me, but because I wrote it myself. A month later, I stood in front of a mirror and didn't recognize the version of myself looking back, but not in the way I used to. This reflection didn't look like a woman unraveling, trying to keep her cracks hidden behind concealer and polite smiles. She looked solid, grounded. Her posture was straighter, like she finally knew what it felt like to take up space without apologizing. Her eyes weren't scanning for danger anymore. They were steady, present. There were still shadows under them, sure, but they weren't from fear. They were from living. I touched the glass, just for a second, as if to remind myself she was real, that I'd become her. You don't walk through fire and come out the same. You come out sharper, lighter, changed. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was stronger now. I could feel it in my silence, in the fact that I didn't wake up expecting disaster. Dean had been gone from my life for weeks, but the weight of him had only just started to fade. That same day, I received a message request on Instagram, an account with no profile photo, no posts. Just a name I didn't recognize, and a single message. He's doing it again. I stared at the screen for a long time, thumb hovering over the notification. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to be pulled back in. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. When I finally tapped, the message continued. A woman. Her tone was clipped, hesitant, the way someone sounds when they're not sure they'll be believed. She didn't give me her full name, but she didn't need to. Her story was too familiar. A man she'd been seeing for a few months. He was charming, generous, said he used to be married to someone cold, manipulative, me. Claimed I'd ruined his life, stolen his money, that he was still recovering from what I'd done. She didn't believe him, not entirely, but she found my post, my name, the story, and then it all made sense. She said she was sorry. She said she was scared. She said she was glad she found the truth in time. I sat on my couch with the phone in my lap, the city glowing outside my window, and realized something sharp and unsettling. Dean wasn't done. Not with me necessarily, but with the story. He had lost the battle, lost the case, lost access to everything I had built, but he hadn't lost the need to control the narrative. And now, he was rewriting it for someone else. Someone new. I could have ignored her message, could have said, "Not my problem anymore," and gone back to my life. But I knew what it felt like to be her, standing at the edge of something you haven't even realized is a trap yet, believing in a version of someone that doesn't exist. So I responded, not with advice, not with warnings, just the truth. What he did, what he tried, what he lost. I didn't add emotion. I didn't need to. The facts were enough. Her final message was short. "Thank you. I'm leaving." That was it. But it stuck with me. Not because I felt like a hero, but because I knew how close she came to becoming the next version of me. That night, I didn't sleep right away. I stayed on the balcony, barefoot, robe pulled tight, the air cool against my skin. And for the first time, I let myself admit something I hadn't said out loud, even in my own head. I wasn't angry at Dean anymore. I wasn't scared of him either. What I felt was something colder, cleaner, indifference. It wasn't numbness. It wasn't avoidance. It was distance. I had climbed so far out of the hole he tried to bury me in that now, Looking back, I barely remembered the sound of his voice. That terrified woman he thought he could manipulate. That version of me was gone. Erased not by his cruelty, but by my choice to survive, to fight, to protect what was mine. I wasn't going to track him. I wasn't going to expose him again. The internet doesn't need another round. But if another woman asked me for the truth, I'd give it freely. Because the best kind of justice doesn't come from courtrooms or settlement numbers. It comes from breaking the cycle. And I was done being part of his. The next morning I went back to writing. Really writing. Not just fragments or thoughts. A full piece. The beginning of something new. It wasn't about Dean. It wasn't about betrayal. It was about aftermath. About reclaiming silence, and space, and self. About the quiet victories that never trend but change everything. I didn't know if it would become anything. A book, a column, a thread lost in the chaos of the internet. I just knew it mattered. Because this time, I wasn't writing to prove anything. I wasn't defending myself. I was creating. On my terms. With my voice. The same voice he tried to twist into weakness. The same voice that, in the end, had been my weapon, my defense, my freedom. I didn't need to end his story. I just needed to write mine. And now, I finally could. The writing became routine before I even realized it. What started as a quiet rebellion, me, my laptop, a blank screen, turned into a daily ritual. Mornings with black coffee and silence. Evenings with wine and the city humming below my windows. I didn't write about Dean, not directly. But his shadow lived in the margins, in the careful word choices, in the ache behind certain sentences, not out of longing, but because stories like mine don't vanish. They leave fingerprints. Still, what filled the page wasn't about loss. It was about what came next. Reclamation, recovery, the blurry, slow march back to self. I didn't care if it got published. I wasn't writing to be seen. I was writing because it helped me understand what I'd lived through and who I was on the other side of it. For the first time, I wasn't trying to outrun the story. I was giving it a place to rest. Somewhere in that process, life began to feel whole again. Not like before. Before was a different kind of whole. One built around someone else's gravity. This was different. Lighter. It was brunch on Sundays with people who asked how I was, and actually wanted the answer. It was sleeping with the windows open, because I wasn't afraid of footsteps in the hallway. It was changing my locks again, this time not out of fear, but because I liked the sound of them clicking closed behind me. I started walking to work again, slower than before, noticing things I hadn't when I was too busy scanning for red flags. Street musicians, bakery smells, that little bookstore on Clark that still handwrites staff recommendations. The world had color again, texture, and I was finally steady enough to take it in without bracing for impact. Then, one afternoon, I ran into someone who didn't know the story. A friend of a friend. Someone who hadn't read the headlines or followed the drama. We met for coffee, purely social, and when he asked about my last relationship, I realized I didn't know how to summarize it anymore. How do you condense betrayal, survival, and courtroom warfare into something casual? I said, it ended messy, and left it at that. He didn't push, just nodded like that was enough. And maybe it was. I didn't owe anyone the details. Dean had taken enough from me. He didn't get to take the narrative too. I wasn't hiding what happened, but I wasn't letting it define me in every room I walked into. That was the shift. Not pretending it hadn't happened, but not needing to explain it either. That's how I knew I'd healed in places I hadn't even realized were still bleeding. Later that week, Patricia called just to check in. No case updates, no paperwork, just a genuine human call. "You sound good," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. You sound like someone who's free. I laughed, and it wasn't bitter. I think I finally am, I told her. And I meant it. Dean hadn't reached out again. The messages had stopped. The whisper campaign had gone quiet. Either he'd moved on, or he'd realized there was nothing left to gain from circling me. Either way, I didn't care. Not because I'd forgotten, but because I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need to watch him fail. I didn't need him to suffer. I just needed peace. And now that I had it, I wasn't trading it for anything. Not even the satisfaction of watching him lose more than he already had. Peace, it turns out, is its own kind of power. That weekend, I finished the piece. The one I'd been writing in fragments for weeks. I didn't cry when I typed the last sentence. I didn't even feel that rush of adrenaline people always talk about when they finish something important. I just exhaled, closed my laptop, and sat there in the quiet. It felt like the final page of a chapter, not the end of the book, just a pause before something new begins. I stood up, stretched, and walked to the window. The city was still moving, still loud, still alive. But inside my apartment, inside me, everything was finally still. Just me, and whatever came next. It didn't take long for the piece to take on a life of its own. I hadn't planned to share it, not really. I told myself I'd just sit with it, keep it tucked away like a final entry in a journal no one else would read. But something about it itched under my skin, like it wasn't meant to stay quiet. It wasn't about Dean, not by name, not even in spirit. It was about what happens after. The slow rebuilding, the private victories, the ache of healing in a world that keeps moving like nothing happened. I uploaded it late at night, unlisted at first, just a private link. I sent it to Patricia, then Margot. Then eventually, I posted it. No hashtags, no clickbait, no flashy headline, just the title, When You Rebuild Alone. I closed my laptop and went to bed without checking if anyone had read it. I didn't need their reactions to validate it. I already knew the truth in every line. By the end of the week, it had been shared over 1,000 times. Quietly, organically. No algorithm push, no viral burst, just one person passing it to another, like a secret they wanted to whisper to someone else who needed to hear it. My inbox filled with messages. Women. A few men. Strangers who weren't strangers anymore. They told me about their own silent battles, about the nights they slept with their phones clutched in their hands, just in case. About the moments they felt themselves vanishing in someone else's version of the truth. And then, in a single breath, they'd say, "Thank you." Not because my words saved them, but because my survival gave theirs a mirror. I didn't respond to every message. I couldn't. But I read them all. Every line. Every story. I let their words sit beside mine like stitches pulling something stronger together. I ran into Dean once, a week after the post had passed 20,000 reads. It was a random Tuesday afternoon, just past 3, outside a coffee shop on the corner of a street I never used to walk down. He was coming out with a drink in one hand and his phone in the other, still performing like someone was watching. He didn't see me at first, but when he did, he froze. Just for a moment. Just long enough. Our eyes met, and I didn't look away. I didn't smile, didn't nod, just held my ground. It was strange, seeing him like that. Small, ordinary. I didn't feel anger, didn't feel fear. What I felt, if anything, was distance. The kind of distance that doesn't shrink, no matter how close someone stands. He opened his mouth, maybe to speak, maybe to apologize, maybe to lie. I turned and walked away before I could find out. Not out of spite, out of choice. I didn't need whatever version of himself he'd prepared for me. I already had the truth. That night, I lit a candle and played music low, the kind I hadn't listened to since the beginning. I cooked for myself. Real food, not frozen leftovers or rushed takeout. I sat on the balcony with my plate in my lap, legs pulled under me, and watched the city blink its quiet lights across the skyline. I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. No court date, no email, no closure. That part of the story had already ended. What I had now wasn't excitement or victory or anything headline-worthy. It was quieter, softer. I had peace. And more importantly, I had my voice. Something Dean tried to steal, twist, bury. He failed. I kept writing. Not for the platform. Not for the inbox full of strangers. For me. Because survival isn't just about escaping someone else's control. It's about returning to yourself without needing permission. The next piece I wrote wasn't about him at all. It was about joy. About what it means to wake up and not dread the day. About dancing barefoot in the kitchen without watching the clock. About choosing softness again, after everything. I didn't even mention the past. I didn't need to. Anyone who's lived through it knows what silence costs. And anyone who's rebuilt themselves knows the value of claiming your own noise. That's what I was doing now. Living out loud. On my terms. No edits. No fear. Just truth. And all the space it deserved. Somewhere in the middle of all that peace, something unexpected happened. I started to forget him. Not in a dramatic movie scene kind of way. There was no single moment when his name vanished from my mind, or his face became a blur. It was more subtle than that. A quiet erosion. I'd walk past a place we used to go, and the memory wouldn't hit me in the chest like it used to. I'd hear a phrase he used to say, and it wouldn't freeze me in place. His voice, once so distinct, so ever-present in my head, had dulled to background noise. Not silence, exactly. Just irrelevance. That's what real healing looks like. Not erasing the past, but letting it shrink until it no longer takes up more space than it deserves. And for once, my life wasn't something I was protecting from him. It was just mine. Lived freely, not in opposition to him, but completely outside of him. I kept writing. Not about pain anymore, but about power. Soft power. The kind that doesn't need to scream to be heard. I wrote about solitude, about rebuilding rituals, about reclaiming joy without explanation. And the more I wrote, the more I saw how many people had been living in the same quiet fear I had for years, afraid to name what they were going through because it didn't look like the kind of abuse people expect. Dean never raised a hand. He raised doubt. He planted confusion. He made silence feel like safety. That's what people like him do. But the response to my writing made one thing clear. I wasn't the only one who had survived that kind of storm. I had just been one of the few to say it out loud. And that made people feel seen. It made me feel seen. And that visibility, for once, didn't scare me. I started getting invitations, podcasts, panels, conferences about empowerment, emotional resilience, financial autonomy. I didn't say yes to everything. God knows I didn't want to become someone's trauma mascot. But I chose the ones that felt real. The ones that weren't about turning my story into content, but about helping other people keep theirs from ending the same way. And every time I spoke, I saw them. The women in the back row. The ones who didn't nod, didn't cry, didn't make a sound, but couldn't look away. I knew that look. I had that look. It's the expression of someone trying to decide if they still have time to escape. And I never told them what to do. I didn't have to. All I said was, "You are not crazy. You are not dramatic. You are not alone." Sometimes, that's all it takes to start a fire. Eventually, the interviews stopped being about Dean. They stopped asking about what he did and started asking about what I was doing now. What came after the fallout? What came after the silence? That's when I knew the story had turned. That I wasn't just the woman whose husband tried to erase her. I was Mabel. I was the woman who rebuilt, who rose, who wrote her way through the ashes, and came out holding a map for anyone else lost in the smoke. That was the legacy I was building. Not revenge, not retribution, but visibility. A reminder that survival doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it's quiet, steady, sharp as glass, and just as clear. And yet, through it all, I never forgot how close I came to letting it break me. That's what keeps me grounded. Not fear, not regret, just respect for how fragile things had once been, how strong they had to become. That's why I never stopped telling the truth, even when the details blurred. Because someone, somewhere, is still in it. Still in the silence. Still listening for permission to leave. So I keep writing. Not because I owe anyone my story, but because I know what it meant to find a voice when mine was nearly gone. I'm not telling this for him. I never was. I'm telling it for her, the woman I used to be, and the women still becoming. There was a day, quiet and unremarkable, when I realized I hadn't thought about Dean in weeks. Not in passing, not in anger, not even in those split-second mental flinches that used to catch me off guard. It hit me while folding laundry, of all things. A song played in the background, one he used to love, and I didn't skip it. I didn't freeze or roll my eyes, or feel that ache that used to trail behind memories. I just kept folding. Shirt, sweater, jeans. And somewhere in the rhythm of it, I understood. I had moved on. Not with someone new, not with some external victory. I had moved on in the purest sense. My mind was no longer orbiting his memory. The gravity had broken. There was no pull anymore. It wasn't a celebration kind of moment. It was too quiet for that. But there was something sacred in it, something soft and unshakable. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't need to. Healing is like that sometimes. It doesn't arrive with declarations or milestones. It just shows up one day in your reflection, in the absence of fear, in the way your body doesn't brace itself for ghosts. I made tea. I watered the plants. I opened my windows wide and let the breeze carry through the apartment like it was clearing out everything old. And in that stillness, I could feel it, the full return of myself. Not the woman I was before Dean. That version of me was gone, and I didn't want her back. No, this was someone new. Someone who'd been tested, who'd been nearly undone, and still stood upright. I got an email the next morning from a small press asking if I'd consider publishing a collection of my writing. Not just the viral piece. Everything. The before, the after, the quiet middle, where the real transformation happened. I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. It wasn't about the exposure or the validation. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. But the idea that someone might hold my story in their hands and see themselves in it, that mattered. That was enough. I said yes. Not because I needed the world to know what I'd survived, but because there was power in turning survival into legacy, in saying, I walked through fire, and here is what I built from the ashes. And maybe someone else, reading it quietly at night, would realize they could do the same. There's a strange intimacy in being known by strangers. People still write to me. They share things they haven't told their closest friends. I read every message. I sit with them. I don't have all the answers. Hell, I barely have most. But I know what it means to be seen in your worst moment and still treated like you're whole. That's what I try to give back. Not advice, not inspiration, just proof. That you can be shattered and not stay broken. That you can lose almost everything and still keep your name, your voice, your peace. And that's the thing Dean never understood. He thought taking the money, the assets, the reputation would leave me hollow. He never once considered that I was the thing worth protecting. That's the legacy he never got to write. Because in the end, it wasn't about what he did. It was about what I did after. About the strength he didn't see coming. About the woman who didn't just survive, but rebuilt. Quietly. Fully. Without him. And now, every time I speak, every time I write, every time I tell this story on my terms, I feel it again. That click. That anchor. That truth. I didn't just get through it. I took back every piece of myself he tried to dismantle, and I turned it into something unbreakable. The book came out quietly. No splashy launch party, no dramatic marketing campaign. Just a simple email from the publisher, a link, a cover image, and a date. That felt right. The story didn't need fireworks. It had already burned hot enough. The cover was clean, muted tones, my name in lowercase, the title small but firm. This is how you leave. I stared at it on my screen for a long time before clicking away. Seeing it there, finished and tangible, felt less like an ending and more like a sigh released from the center of my chest. Not because I needed people to read it, but because now it existed. Out in the world. A map for anyone walking through the wreckage. A quiet flag staked in the ground that said, "You're not alone." People found it. Not by accident, not virally, but with purpose. The way you find something you didn't know you were looking for until it lands in your hands. Messages started again. Slower this time. More thoughtful. Some people didn't write anything at all, just sent a photo of the book on their nightstand. Underlined, dog-eared, lived in. One message simply said, "Page 42. I cried. Thank you, I didn't need more than that." I wasn't interested in the attention. I was interested in the connection. In knowing the pain I lived through didn't have to be wasted. That it had turned into something useful. Something real. Something that reached past me. I never wanted to be a spokesperson. But I was proud of what I had made. Of how I had shaped the truth into something that could hold other people. Not just haunt me. Then, one afternoon, I got a message from someone I hadn't heard from in years. A mutual friend from the early days, back when Dean and I were still posting carefully curated pictures of our perfect life. She had vanished when things got ugly, when the truth started to bleed through. But now, her message was simple. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I didn't respond right away. I let it sit. Not because I was angry anymore, but because I knew what it took for someone to say those words without trying to explain their absence. A few days later, I wrote back. Neither did I. But now I do. That was all. It didn't need to be more. Closure, I've learned, isn't always a conversation. Sometimes it's just a boundary you no longer have to guard. Sometimes it's a scar that doesn't ache anymore. I started thinking about what comes next. Not in the anxious, future-chasing way I used to, just in a curious, open kind of way. There was talk of another book. Maybe fiction this time. Maybe something softer. A story that didn't have to carry so much weight. I liked that idea, of writing from a place of peace instead of survival. I began jotting down characters, fragments, scenes that had nothing to do with betrayal or rebuilding. Just life. Simple, textured life. That felt like its own kind of revolution. To write without needing to prove I'd made it through. To simply create because I could. Because I was still here. Still whole. Still choosing what my voice sounded like, without anyone else's permission. And in the middle of all that stillness, I realized something else. I wasn't just free from Dean. I was free from the version of myself that had once needed someone like him. The version who doubted her instincts, softened her voice, handed over her passwords and her patience and her peace. That woman was gone. Not buried, not erased, but transformed. And I loved her for getting me this far, for surviving what she didn't deserve. But I didn't need her anymore. I had built something steadier in her place, something quieter, stronger, something entirely mine. It was a late Friday evening when I finally let myself do something I hadn't done in a very long time. Nothing. No writing, no planning, no updating outlines or checking analytics. Just me, a glass of wine, and the soft hum of the city through an open window. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask for anything. I curled up on the couch in an old sweatshirt that still smelled faintly of fabric softener, legs tucked beneath me, phone face down on the table. No notifications, no distractions, just stillness. For the first time, I didn't feel like I needed to fill it. I didn't feel like I had to be productive or reflective or even strong. I was just present, breathing, whole. The kind of moment you don't realize you're craving until it arrives and settles gently over you like a warm blanket. The sky outside was streaked with that last amber blush of sun slipping beneath the buildings. And for a second, I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who would have been scrolling her messages, waiting for someone to call, to validate, to notice. I barely recognized her now. Not because she was weak, but because she was always waiting for permission to rest. Permission to feel safe. Permission to stop explaining herself. I wanted to reach through time and tell her, you don't owe anyone that kind of exhaustion. But she's gone now. Not buried, just changed. And maybe that's the most underrated kind of growth. The kind that doesn't announce itself. That doesn't need a witness. Just the quiet knowledge that you're no longer trying to be palatable to someone who would have devoured you anyway. There was a knock at the door around 9. Not loud, not urgent, just the sound of someone arriving who wasn't in a hurry. For a moment, instinct kicked in. That familiar tension in my spine, the mental inventory of who it could be. But it faded just as fast. I got up slowly, barefoot on hardwood, and opened the door to see Margot standing there with a bottle of Prosecco and that raised eyebrow that said, "You weren't planning to celebrate without me, were you?" I laughed, because of course she remembered. "Your book's been out for a month," she said, stepping inside like she owned the place. "And you've done exactly nothing to market. That ends tonight." I didn't argue. I just grabbed 2 glasses and followed her out to the balcony, where the air felt a little sweeter, a little lighter. She popped the cork, poured, and handed me a glass. "To endings," she said, "and even better beginnings." We drank slowly, the city alive beneath us, but not louder than our quiet. Margot didn't ask about Dean. She didn't bring up the past, didn't prod at wounds she knew had already closed. She just sat with me, like she had 100 times before, and let the moment be what it was. We talked about small things, mundane, beautiful things. And I realized that's what healing really looks like. Not turning your pain into a brand, or your survival into a banner, but sitting beside someone you trust and not having to say a word about what broke you. Because you've already said enough. Because now, you get to talk about what's next. About what's possible. About the kind of joy that doesn't come with conditions. When she left, I stood at the doorway for a long while, watching her disappear down the sidewalk. Then I turned back to the apartment, the one I had once feared would feel too empty, and felt only warmth. I didn't turn the lights on. Just let the glow from the street lamps spill across the floor as I walked to the bedroom. No weight followed me. Maybe that's what peace really is. The moment you stop expecting the past to knock again, and instead, you welcome yourself home. I've told this story in pieces, through bank statements and courtroom transcripts, through silence, through survival, through sentences I wasn't sure I was ready to write. And now, as I reach the end, I find there's no need to tie it in a perfect bow. Life doesn't end in clean conclusions. It ends in quiet choices. In the mornings when you wake up and realize you're not afraid anymore. In the evenings when you cook dinner for one and feel whole. In the slow, steady unfolding of a life that is finally yours again. This wasn't just about Dean. It was about the slow erosion of trust. The kind of betrayal that doesn't leave bruises, but still breaks bones. It was about finding my voice after it had been questioned, doubted, silenced. It was about learning to trust myself again, not because someone gave me permission, but because I decided I was worth the certainty. Every choice I made, every line I drew, every document I didn't sign, it wasn't just strategy, it was a reclamation. I've learned that survival doesn't always look like a fight. Sometimes it looks like walking away without turning back. Sometimes it looks like holding your own hand when no one else does. Sometimes it looks like saying, I don't forgive you, but I free myself anyway. I didn't get justice in the dramatic sense. There was no cinematic apology, no final showdown. What I got was better. My life. And if you're reading this, maybe holding your breath, maybe wondering if you're imagining it, maybe halfway out the door, I hope you know you're not crazy. You're not overreacting. And you're not alone. You don't have to wait for the damage to be visible to call it real. You don't have to wait for someone to give you permission to leave. You are allowed to choose yourself before someone else forces you to. Because survival isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's one quiet decision at a time. And sometimes, it's just this. I stayed when it was hard, I left when it was harder, and I built a life beyond him anyway. Thank you for watching. Her story is one of survival, truth, and finally choosing herself. To hear more stories like this, click on the left, and make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. You are not alone in what you've lived.